They told me I didn't belong. "You don't belong here, Whitaker. Go home and bake cookies." That was Sergeant Rourke's warm morning greeting after I arrived 8 minutes late to formation. My name is Sarah Whitaker. I'm 27, from a dusty corner of Utah where the horizon stretches for miles and neighbors are a 10-minute drive, minimum. I was late that morning because I had spent the night in the base infirmary, sitting with a young recruit named Peterson who nearly had a breakdown after getting a call about his mother being in the ICU. I stayed because no one else would. But Rourke didn't care. Nobody did. The truth is, no one wanted my explanations. What they wanted was to see me fail, and I had just handed them a reason. 3 months later, my name would be etched into the sharpshooter wall at Camp Ridgemont. But on that cold, humid morning in North Carolina, all anyone saw was another woman who couldn't keep up. I didn't look like what most of them thought a soldier should look like. I'm just under 5 feet 4 inches, with a frame built more for ranch work than infantry drills. I keep my blonde hair tied tight, my uniform crisp, and my boots shined. But for some reason, none of that seemed to matter. The base had been my home for 4 months. Assigned to logistics with the 15th Airborne out of Camp Ridgemont, I was just another PFC in a sea of names. My room was bare, except for a few photos from home, a beat-up copy of my granddad's old field journal from Vietnam, and a stack of letters I never quite finished writing. I'd enlisted right after my 26th birthday. My family had been shocked. My mother thought I'd eventually settle down and run the ranch after my brother died in that machinery accident. But I couldn't. I needed to do something more. Something that mattered. Granddad used to say service meant putting others first, even when no one noticed. That stuck with me, especially now. That morning, as Rourke's words cut through the cold air, I stood at attention, boots scuffed from the sprint across base, sweat dripping down my back, and said nothing. Protocol demanded silence. Unless asked, you didn't speak. And Rourke wasn't asking. He was performing. Performing for the rest of the platoon, who chuckled and whispered behind cupped hands. The punishment was swift. Extra duty scrubbing the mess hall for 2 weeks, confined to base, and a formal letter of reprimand. No one asked why I was late. No one asked about Peterson. No one cared that I might have kept a 19-year-old from doing something irreversible. That night, while I wiped floors under the flickering fluorescent lights, the nickname started. Cookie. It spread fast. From the mess hall to the barracks, everyone had a joke. Cookie can't hack it. Cookie burned the formation again. Even some of the NCOs snickered. I kept my mouth shut and kept working. But when I finally got back to my barracks, the silence hit me like a truck. I stared at the photo of my grandfather in uniform. For the first time since enlisting, I wondered if I'd made a huge mistake. I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I just sat there, staring at the wall. I'd done the right thing. But here, right didn't seem to matter much. I didn't sleep much that night. Between the muscle ache from cleaning the mess hall and the bruises from being laughed at in front of my unit, my body and pride felt like they'd both taken a beating. The next morning, I was up before reveille. I didn't want to be seen. I slipped out, laced my boots by the light of a single lamp, and jogged down to the motor pool where the old generator units had been acting up. I wasn't ordered to be there. I just needed to do something, anything, that felt useful. I knew machines. Growing up on a ranch teaches you that engines don't care about your feelings. If a tractor won't start, it's not being difficult, it's broken. Fix it or don't eat. Simple. That morning, Sergeant Klein from Bravo Company was struggling with a stuck fan belt on a Humvee. He cursed under his breath as I walked by, then paused. "Hey, Cookie, you know how to fix this?" He didn't mean it kindly. But I nodded. "Yes, Sergeant." 5 minutes later, the engine roared to life. He didn't say thanks. Just grunted and walked off. But I saw the look in his eyes. Confusion. Surprise. Like a dog expecting a toy to bark. By that weekend, word got around that I could fix things. I started getting quiet knocks on my door from soldiers with jammed gear, glitchy radios, or ripped packs. They never said it out loud, but they knew I wouldn't judge. I just helped. Still, the nickname stuck. One of the worst moments came during a squad-level field exercise 2 weeks later. We were in the woods, doing movement-to-contact drills. Everyone had to rotate through different positions. When it was my turn to lead, Sergeant Rourke gave a dramatic sigh and handed me a dummy map. "Try not to get us lost, Cookie." My jaw clenched. I held the map tightly and gave the orders like I was supposed to. My team followed, mostly because they had to, not because they trusted me. I led us straight to the checkpoint. No errors. No delays. But when we arrived, Rourke said nothing. Just nodded to the next soldier. They couldn't even say good job. Later that night, while everyone else sat around the fire, I quietly broke down a jammed saw that had overheated during drills. I cleaned the entire thing under moonlight. No one asked me to. I just wanted to prove that I belonged. After that exercise, Staff Sergeant Mendoza, one of the few who treated me like a real person, pulled me aside. "You ever think about qualifying for sharpshooter certs?" he asked. I blinked. "You think I could?" "I think anyone who can spot broken optics by sound alone might be wasting her time in logistics," he said. He was the first to say it out loud. That maybe I was more than the nickname I'd been given. I started spending every spare hour at the range. At first, I was just trying to stay sharp. But the more time I spent there, the more I realized that I was good. Really good. I outshot half the platoon in quiet side bets. Nobody saw it coming, but I had a secret weapon. Years of hunting coyotes and long-range target shooting back home. My grandfather had always said, "Shoot like you only get one round. And if you miss, shoot like you don't deserve another." So that's what I did. The range became my second home. Every evening, after chow and whatever duty I was assigned that day, usually the worst shifts no one else wanted, I'd head out to the firing line. Sometimes the wind howled so hard it kicked dirt into my eyes. Sometimes I shot until my arms ached and my fingers went numb. But I kept going. At first, the range instructors just waved me off. "There goes Cookie again," I heard one of them mutter. "Probably thinks she's Annie Oakley." But that didn't matter. What mattered was the grouping on my targets. Tight. Centered. Reliable. Within 3 weeks, Sergeant Mendoza started showing up during my practice. At first, he didn't say anything. Just stood behind me, arms crossed, watching. Then one day, after I dropped 5 rounds into a 4-inch group at 200 meters, he stepped up beside me and said, "You're ready." Ready for what? The Fort Ridgemont marksmanship trials. I blinked. They'd never let me in. He gave a dry laugh. "They don't have a choice. The slots are based on prequel scores. And you just outshot 3 of the guys already in the lineup." When the official roster was posted 2 days later, my name was on the list, last on the line, of course, but there. A few people scoffed openly. Rourke shook his head and muttered, "What a waste of a spot." One of the other shooters smirked and whispered, "Guess Cookie's bringing cookies for the judges." I just nodded and walked away. The night before the competition, I sat on my bunk, staring at the worn photo of my grandfather in uniform. He'd been a sniper in Vietnam, decorated but quiet about it. He used to say the best shooters were the ones nobody remembered, the ones who never missed because they never needed the credit. I remembered the last story he ever told me before he passed, about losing a friend in a firefight because someone flinched. "If you ever carry a rifle," he said, "carry it with purpose. Don't shoot to prove something. Shoot to protect someone." That night, I loaded my kit slowly. I wasn't carrying that rifle to prove Rourke wrong. I was carrying it for every soldier who'd ever needed someone to believe in them when no one else would. I slept like a rock. Morning came fast. The air was crisp, with low fog clinging to the field. Our CO, Colonel Fraser, stood beside the range tower, clipboard in hand. Around me, the other competitors adjusted their scopes, flexed their hands, joked about lunch. I stayed silent. The rules were simple. For shooting positions, prone, kneeling, sitting, and standing. Targets at 100, 200, and 300 meters. Time limits. Wind calls made on the fly. When it was my turn, I stepped into position and took a deep breath. I heard someone whisper, "Cookie's gonna choke." I ignored them. I looked through the scope, remembered the dry Utah wind and the long nights guarding our livestock. And I fired. Each shot was deliberate, clean, focused. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. By the time I finished the final standing round, there were no more jokes. No more whispers. Just silence. After my final shot landed, I stepped back and cleared my weapon, hands steady. The range officer checked my chamber and nodded me off the line. Nobody said a word. The silence was louder than the gunfire. I walked back to the bench where I'd left my gear, sat down, and waited like everyone else. The range staff tallied scores inside a small trailer, windows fogged from the sudden heat of coffee pots and tense breaths. 30 minutes crawled by like hours. Around me, soldiers stood in loose groups, whispering. I could feel the change. The tone was different, less mockery, more uncertainty. Sergeant Mendoza stood off to the side, arms folded. His face was unreadable, but I caught the smallest nod from him when our eyes met. It wasn't encouragement. It was acknowledgement. The trailer door creaked open. Lieutenant Danvers, clipboard in hand, strode onto the range with the kind of formality that told you something big had happened. "All right," he called. "Scores are in." Everyone tensed. In third place, Corporal Jameson, Delta Company. Polite claps. Second place, Staff Sergeant Leong, Alpha Company. More applause, a few proud shouts. Danvers looked down at the final name, and for a second, just a second, his eyebrows raised. In first place, Private First Class Sarah Whitaker, 15th Logistics Support, with the highest individual marksmanship score in Fort Ridgemont competition history. The silence was absolute. I stood, slowly, my rifle slung across my back, helmet in hand. No one clapped at first. They just stared. One of the shooters who had mocked me earlier scratched his head like he hadn't heard right. Another whispered something to his buddy and looked away. Then, finally, someone started clapping. I think it was Mendoza. Maybe Danvers. Soon others joined in. A few hesitant at first. Then louder. Not everyone clapped, of course. Rourke didn't. He just crossed his arms, jaw tight, eyes locked on the ground. I didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just stood there, heart pounding quietly, accepting the certificate Danvers handed me. "You earned this," he said under his breath. I nodded. "Thank you, sir." Later that afternoon, word spread across base like a fire in dry brush. I had broken a 6-year standing record. My name was being engraved on the battalion's sharpshooter wall, the first woman's name ever listed there. I returned to the barracks that evening exhausted, my arms sore from the day, my legs aching from tension held too long. But my hands? They were steady. On my cot was a folded note. No name, just a scrap of paper that read, "You did what they said you couldn't. We see you now." I didn't recognize the handwriting. Didn't need to. By the end of the week, things were different. Not radically, not overnight. But something had shifted. People still called me Cookie, but the edge was gone. It wasn't mockery anymore, just habit. And when they said it now, some of them followed it with a nod, a smirk, or even, God forbid, a touch of respect. Sergeant Rourke avoided me for 3 days straight. He couldn't look me in the eye during formation. On Thursday, during weapons maintenance, I caught him glancing my way while I cleaned my assigned M4. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then just turned and left. Fine by me. That night, I stayed late in the armory. The supply clerk had botched the inventory, and everything was out of order. I didn't complain, I just fixed it. Wrenches sorted, cleaning kits topped up, optics recalibrated. Around 2100, the door creaked open. Private Peterson, the kid I'd stayed with in the infirmary that night months ago, stepped inside. He stood awkwardly for a second, then said, "You saved me, you know." I blinked. "What?" "That night, in medical. You didn't leave. Even when I said I didn't want help." His voice cracked. "You didn't have to stay." I set the rifle aside and looked at him. It wasn't about having to. It was the right thing to do. He swallowed. "I just wanted to say thanks." He left as quietly as he'd come in. I sat there a long time after, hands folded, the faint scent of gun oil clinging to the air. It reminded me why I joined in the first place. That weekend, Colonel Fraser called for a full battalion assembly. Rumor was that a new training initiative was rolling out, and they needed top performers to mentor units across the base. I figured I'd watch from the back row. Then he stepped up to the mic and said, "Before we start, there's one name I want to recognize." My stomach dropped. "Private First Class Sarah Whitaker," he continued. "Step forward." The entire battalion turned. I swallowed hard, pushed through the ranks, and stood at attention in front of the colonel. "Your performance in last week's marksmanship trial was not only exemplary, it was historic. We've engraved your name into the sharpshooter wall, something no woman has ever achieved in this battalion." His voice carried over the crowd. "Your commitment to excellence, even when dismissed, mocked, or overlooked, represents everything we should strive for." He paused. "And for those who doubted her, let this stand as proof. Respect is earned, and she earned it." For the first time in months, I heard my name spoken without sarcasm. No nicknames, no ridicule, just respect. As I stepped back into formation, Peterson met my eyes. He nodded once. Even Rourke, standing stiffly in the front row, gave me a sharp, wordless salute. It wasn't apology. It wasn't friendship. But it was something. The battalion's sharpshooter wall wasn't fancy. Just polished wood with brass nameplates, mounted in the hallway outside the command office. But to anyone who served at Camp Ridgemont, it was sacred ground. I passed by it dozens of times in my first months there, always with a glance. A reminder of where I didn't belong. That changed the day I saw my name go up. Private First Class Sarah Whitaker. Engraved brass. Second row, dead center. Right beneath Sergeant First Class Nunez, the guy who once taught urban counter-sniper courses to the Special Forces before he retired to Ridgemont as an instructor. Seeing my name there didn't make me feel proud. Not exactly. It made me feel heavy. Like I was finally carrying something I'd been fighting to hold for months. Legitimacy. I didn't tell anyone, but I stood in front of that wall for a long time that night after everyone else had cleared out. Just me, the sound of humming fluorescent lights, and the echo of every moment they told me I wasn't enough. The next day, something strange happened. A corporal from Delta Company, Anders, I think his name was, approached me during PT. He looked awkward, scratching the back of his neck, avoiding eye contact. I heard you're good with scope calibration, he said. Mine's been drifting. Mind taking a look? It was a simple request, but it meant everything. That night, I had 2 more knocks on my door. One soldier needed help with a field strip. Another just wanted to know how I managed wind adjustments during that final round of the trial. They weren't mocking me. They were learning from me. It was subtle, but I could feel it. The tide turning. They started calling me Whitaker more often. A few still said Cookie, but now it was half smile, half teasing. Nothing mean. Some even asked where the nickname came from. I never answered. Let them figure it out. Rourke hadn't spoken to me since the trial, but I could see it in his eyes. He knew he'd misjudged me. Whether he regretted it or not didn't matter. What mattered was that the sneers were gone. But it wasn't about being liked anymore. I didn't come here for acceptance. I came to serve. So I did. I doubled down. More time at the range. More late-night repairs. Helping new recruits with quals. Volunteering for the least glamorous tasks. Perimeter checks, motor pool duty, equipment runs. I didn't care who was watching anymore. I was no longer trying to prove something. I already had. 2 weeks after my name went up on the wall, something unexpected happened. I got called into Colonel Fraser's office. I'd never been in there before, at least not for anything good. Usually, that space was reserved for reprimands, high-level briefings, or the kind of trouble that ended careers. But when I stepped inside, Fraser didn't even look up from his paperwork. Whitaker, he said, still scribbling. Sit. I obeyed, back straight, hands folded in my lap. He finished writing, then glanced up. I've been watching. That wasn't comforting. I'm assigning you to a cross-unit evaluation team, he continued. Effective immediately. I blinked. Sir. He leaned back, tapping the edge of his desk. We've got units that are slipping, low cohesion, poor maintenance, poor range performance. I want you embedded temporarily to get them back on track. But I'm not. He held up a hand. You're not command, no? But you've earned respect the hard way. Through performance. Through silence. Through consistency. And that speaks louder than rank in the right ears. I nodded slowly. Yes, sir. You'll be rotating through Alpha and Echo companies first, he said. Report to Sergeant Morales tomorrow. He'll give you your schedule. As I stood to leave, he added, Whitaker, don't let them drag you down. Make them rise to meet you. That night, I packed light. Just the essentials. I was being reassigned, but not relocated. It was more like a tour of duty across the messiest corners of the battalion. My first stop, Alpha Company, wasn't thrilled to see me. Morales introduced me as the shooter from logistics, which drew a few chuckles and raised brows. The platoon sergeant made a point to remind me I had no command authority. I know, I told him. Then don't overstep. Roger that. The first few days were rough. Cold shoulders, short answers, and zero interest in what I had to say. They figured I was there to spy, or to prove something. So I did what I always did, worked. Quietly. Precisely. Relentlessly. When one of their designated marksmen couldn't zero his rifle, I fixed it. When their field radio failed during a drill, I diagnosed the wiring fault in under 10 minutes. And when their team lead rolled his ankle on a muddy slope during a night op, I led the squad back with no GPS, just map, compass, and memory. After that, they stopped talking about me like I wasn't in the room. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was a presence. By the time I finished my second week with Alpha Company, I wasn't just tolerated. I was being trusted. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody threw me a party. But trust in the military never is. It comes in smaller moments. The squad leader handing you the map during a night patrol, a corporal calling your name first during gear checks, or a private asking to double-check they're zeroing with you before a live-fire drill. They weren't calling me Cookie anymore. They were calling me Whitaker. Sometimes just Whit. It felt earned. Echo Company was next. They were more disciplined, but colder. Fewer jokes, more pressure. Their CO was hardline and didn't care much for battalion politics, which meant he didn't care about sharpshooter walls or nicknames, either. All he wanted was results. That suited me just fine. My second day with Echo, we ran a close-quarters training exercise. One of their fire team leaders, Staff Sergeant Breen, put me on the back line again, probably hoping I'd stay out of the way. I didn't. During a breach simulation, I noticed the assault stack forming too tight in the hallway. I said nothing. I didn't have rank to override the plan. But when I saw a failure unfolding, I slipped out of line and rerouted through a side corridor. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't even planned. But when the team hit a simulated ambush and stalled, I flanked from the side and cleared the objective in under 9 seconds. No one expected it, least of all Breen. Afterwards, he cornered me. Who told you to adjust the plan? No one. Then why'd you break formation? I looked him dead in the eye. Because I've seen what happens when you wait for permission in a bad plan. He stared at me a long moment, then said, next time, tell me first, then do it anyway. That night, while we ran gear checks, one of Echo's medics sat down next to me. They said you used to fix Humvees, she said. Now you're breaching doors? I smiled faintly. Guess I'm still fixing things. That became a theme. Wherever I was sent, I patched what others had ignored. Broken weapons, overlooked rookies, or unspoken fractures between squad mates. I didn't lecture. I didn't command. I just acted. And in a place where everyone was trained to follow orders, being the one who acted, that made people whisper. Not in mockery this time. In respect. After 3 weeks bouncing between units, I was exhausted, but not from the work. It was the constant proving. Every new squad was a reset button. Every new sergeant another test. But the results were always the same. They started by watching me closely, doubting quietly, and ended by pulling me into their circle. What surprised me most was the leadership. The officers and NCOs who once called me Cookie in a tone soaked with sarcasm were now inviting me into planning sessions, asking for my input during strategy briefings, requesting that I observe newer soldiers who were showing promise or risk. I kept thinking back to the girl who'd stood in formation 3 months earlier, boots scuffed from sprinting out of the medical bay, being laughed at because she dared to care. She was still here, just standing a little taller. One morning, back at Camp Ridgemont, I was assigned to run a weapons maintenance clinic for a new batch of recruits. They were fresh, still wide-eyed, some still learning how to wear their uniforms correctly. I was expecting indifference at best. But when I walked into the armory, one of them straightened in his seat and whispered, "That's her. That's the sharpshooter." That was new. I didn't give speeches. I just showed them how to strip their rifles properly, how to read barrel wear, how to recalibrate after a fall or jam. Quiet, methodical. They asked more questions than I expected, and they listened. At the end of the session, one recruit stayed behind. A young woman, probably 19 or 20, nervous but determined. She looked at me like I'd grown wings. "I heard what they called you," she said softly. "Back then, Cookie, right?" I raised an eyebrow. "Still do sometimes. But they don't laugh now," she added. "Why?" I smiled just a little. "Because I didn't stop." She hesitated, then nodded like she understood more than she let on. "They don't think I belong either." "You don't prove them wrong by yelling," I said. "You prove them wrong by surviving. And then by thriving." She didn't say anything, but the way she adjusted her stance before walking out told me she'd carry that with her. Later that night, Sergeant Rourke caught up with me outside the range. He stood awkwardly, hands on his hips, eyes darting toward the ground. "I was wrong," he said finally. "About you." I didn't say anything. I wanted to hear the rest. "You didn't just earn your spot," he added. "You earned ours too." It wasn't an apology. Not really. But I didn't need one. Some battles aren't won with words. They're won by showing up when no one expects you to, and staying long after they hoped you'd leave. The weeks passed. The murmurs died down. What remained was something far stronger than rumor or reputation: consistency. And in the military, that's currency. I stopped counting how many squads I rotated through. Bravo Company, Charlie. Even the MPs started calling me in when something broke or someone cracked under pressure. Everywhere I went, the same pattern played out. Skepticism, silence, respect. But the moment that stayed with me most didn't come with a ceremony or a speech. It came one evening when I was back in my own unit's barracks for the first time in weeks. Private Peterson, who now carried himself with a quiet confidence, knocked on my door. He had something in his hand. It was a patch. Just a simple Velcro square with my last name stitched on it in green and black thread. Below it, smaller text: earned, not given. I made it, he said awkwardly. Figured it should go on your gear. I stared at it for a moment before accepting it. Thanks, I said quietly. That patch now lives on the inside of my kit bag. Not visible, not flashy, but I see it every time I gear up. I never wanted glory. Never cared about being the first name on a wall. I didn't need to silence my critics. I just needed to stay true to the reason I joined: to serve, to protect, to matter. There are still soldiers who roll their eyes when they hear my name. Some people can't be convinced. That's fine. But most know who I am now. Not because I shouted it, but because I showed it, every day, in every action, without fail. I'm still Sarah Whitaker. Still the ranch girl from Utah. Still the one who stayed in a medical bay all night because someone needed me. And I'll keep showing up. Because this isn't about proving them wrong anymore. It's about proving myself right. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.